Earlier this year, I was with my wife Megan at the YMCA near our house in Iowa. We were on the stationary bikes, and as we were getting ready to leave, a guy started up a conversation with me. It ended up being a really amazing conversation. Very naturally, I got to share my testimony with him of how I started to follow Jesus, and he shared his views on God. He's been in the medical field his whole career. I tell you about this guy because, like all of us, he's searching. He is absolutely, desperately searching for satisfaction. He told me that he has a 6,000 square foot house out in the country with a 4-car garage. He has a second home down in Florida with a fancy car that he loved to tell me about that he doesn't even use, that he said he gets down there about once a year, 1 week a year, because he's a little too busy. He actually had on the stationary bikes we had these like computer screens on them, and he actually had a search for a brand new Lincoln Continental on his screen as we were talking. He has 4 kids. He divorced his wife and is now in a homosexual relationship. He said he has more money than he knows what to do with, and the only reason he hasn't retired is because he doesn't know what else to do with his time. Stories like his are why I do ministry. That man, as a teenager, as a college student, as a young father, didn't have someone tell him over and over and over again that Jesus is the only one that can satisfy you. Your job won't, your nice possessions won't, your family won't, your spouse won't, a new sexual adventure will not satisfy you. Only Jesus will. He said, I don't know what else I'd do with my time. Really? With all of the money and experience and expertise and incredible wealth of a network of people, he doesn't have a bigger purpose than himself. In Luke chapter 9, the author tells us 12 quick stories that all orient around 2 questions. Who is Jesus? And what does a life of following Jesus look like? I want to focus on just one of those stories, and it's where Jesus feeds the 5,000. It's verses 10 to 17 in Luke chapter 9. Jesus had sent out the 12 disciples to do 2 things: to teach about the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. And so in our story, in verses 10 to 17, the disciples, they get back and they're reporting to him everything that happened. And they want to kind of sneak off and get some time alone to debrief and relax. But the crowds, they come and find Jesus and his disciples. They come way out into the wilderness, and they go so far out that the disciples worry about the crowd's safety and health being so far out without lodging and food. These were most likely very poor people who might not be in a good situation anyways. And so Jesus, when his disciples approach him and say, hey, we've got to figure something out, we've got to send them back home, we got to disperse this crowd, Jesus tells them, you feed them. Why don't you feed them? So Jesus, he takes the little that they have, because they're like, there's no way we could feed all of these people. And so Jesus, he takes the little that they have, the bread and the fish, and he multiplies them. And he keeps ripping off pieces and giving them fish, and he just keeps going, and he gives them to the disciples, and the disciples continue to feed all of these people, 5,000 men, not counting the women and children that were with them. He feeds all of these people, the entire crowd, with 12 basketfuls left over. This whole chapter, like I said, is focusing on 2 questions. Who is Jesus, and what does a life of following Jesus look like? And there's this crazy parallel between this story and Moses out in the wilderness with the nation of Israel. Moses, he led the nation of Israel out of slavery in a super amazing, miraculous way, and you can read about this in Exodus. They wander around for a long time, and eventually the people are super angry. They think that they're going to starve, and so Moses, he meets with God, And God then feeds all the people just enough to get by. He gives them just enough every day to get by. To the Jews in Jesus' day, Moses represents so much more than just a story. We might read this and go, oh, cool, God did a really neat miracle and gave them manna and stuff like that. But the Jews in Jesus' day, Moses represents so much more. He represented the law. He represented an entire way of life and identity. And so essentially Luke is saying, in the way that he structures this story about Jesus, he's saying, look, both of them were in the wilderness. Both of them fed the masses. Both of them leaned on the Father for help. Moses had just enough, and the people complained and were really mad at him. And Jesus had 12 basketfuls of leftovers, and the crowds were satisfied. It says in verse 17, they all ate as much as they wanted. In the ESV, it says something along the lines of, they all ate and were satisfied. They were satisfied. And so, our two questions, who is Jesus and what does a life of following Jesus look like? Let's go back to consider my YMCA friend. Jesus is himself satisfying, and he brings us into a kingdom life that is satisfying. Think about this man's life. Everything, and I don't mean to bash on him, and I do pray that he would meet Jesus and find satisfaction in him, but think about this man's life that was oriented all around himself. And he was willing to spark up a conversation with a stranger to brag on his possessions and basically say he doesn't have purpose. Imagine this man getting invited into a kingdom where the poor find inheritance, a kingdom where those who mourn are comforted, where the humble have a huge inheritance, where those who hunger and thirst for justice find it, where the merciful are shown mercy, where broken people are healed and become whole again, a kingdom where skilled dentists use their wealth and expertise to bless instead of hoard. How could this guy's story have been different if, as a young man, he decided that he was going to trust Jesus when, in the story right after the one we read, Jesus says, what do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your very soul? And so, two questions for us. First, how does this affect you? How does this story of Jesus bringing satisfaction, how does this affect you? Maybe it could be a question like, who or what are you putting your trust in that won't satisfy? We need to ask ourselves that question. And the second question is, who needs to hear this from you? Not from me, not share this video, though you could, that'd be cool. But who needs to hear this truth from you? Who needs to hear this truth from you? What young person in your life or coworker or spouse needs you to soak them in prayer beforehand and then say, hey, can I share this story of Jesus bringing satisfaction with you? This was powerful to me. So those two questions, how's it affect you and who can you share it with, would be what I'd challenge you with today. So friends, be bold, be brave, ask hard questions.